Testing, testing.
Yeah, we got you, Stephen. All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we lost the introduction, so thank you to iGaming for bringing us all here today. My name is Zach
Hello?
Cohen. I'm the. Oh, sorry. Are you there?
Sorry, Zach. I missed that completely. No, we haven't lost the introduction. I'm still here. Sorry about that, Zach.
All right.
I'll take
Hey,
over.
it's
Sorry
all
about that for
yours.
that
Good,
fault.
go for it. I'm supposed to be the one that's early in the morning.
Massive apologies for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Carter. I'm the editorial director at IGB, and I'll be chairing today's IGB webinar. We're delighted today to be hosting a webinar with Trulioo, discussing getting international customers into the right onboarding lane. Get the account creation process right, and this becomes a huge competitive differentiator for gaming operators, driving revenue and profit and establishing meaningful and long-term relationships with customers. Real-time identity verification can play a crucial role in meeting demands for both security and speed when signing up for a new account, helping organizations to forge stronger, more trusted customer relationships that will last a long time after the spectre of COVID-19 has passed. In this webinar, Trulioo will discuss how companies can quickly assess identity risk and auto-generate customized verification workflows for optimal digital experiences. Our presenter today is Zach Cohen, who is Chief Operating Officer at Trulioo. I'll let Zach introduce himself more fully shortly. Then there'll be a Q&A section following the presentation. So please do submit as many questions as you like as we go along, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible in the allocated time. With that, I'm going to pass over to Zach. Over to you, Zach.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good morning for me. I'm on the west coast of Canada over here speaking to you this morning. Very happy to join you all today. Here's a little bit of what we're going to dive into. We're going to talk about what international customers are looking for today in a gaming operator. We're also going to cover some secrets and commentary around balancing safety on the one side and a first-class user experience on the other. And we're going to talk about risk-based approaches and really what those mean. We want to obviously touch on how the regulatory environment impacts our industry in this world of gaming online. We want to talk about fraud and how that's been impacted and resulted from some of the changes we've seen in the environment around COVID today. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do and our expertise in identity verification and how Trulioo can help customers in that. Now, throughout the session, and we're going to see our first one right now, we're actually going to share a couple polls with you as well. And we'd love for everyone just to put your response in and give us an answer there that we can hopefully discuss a little later along with any Q&A that folks have throughout the presentation today. So right off the bat, we just wanted to get some participation here and ask everyone that's logged in here today, what channels are you currently using today to onboard your customers? Are you still doing things in person? Is that possible? Over the phone still, face-to-face interactions in some markets where that's still available? Is your primary vehicle your website where customers are filling out a form, logging on, signing up through their computers or phones? Do you have a mobile app that's that specialized journey there on iOS or Android? Or is there something else that we forgot and you have a different one? Let's stick to the majority of our customers. Where's the majority of that path coming to today? So feel free to jump in and launch that poll. Where are we today and where have we come in the gaming industry specifically? So when I look back 10 years ago, the gaming industry revenue reached almost $6 billion. So obviously a very healthy industry. But when we jump forward to today, it's just skyrocketed in a very short amount of time. And what I thought was an interesting statistic that we were able to pull up recently was discount gaming overall, mobile gaming specifically, that revenue alone is expected to reach upwards of $75 billion. And 50% of the games that are being created are only available on smartphones or tablets because the industry and those delivering those games feel that they are portable, cost-effective, easy to operate. So that really demonstrates in plain numbers where that shift has gone in relation to previous methodologies to join gaming and where we're seeing things today. And that really leads us to what we talk about as a borderless global gaming world. And why this is of interest is because we are actually seeing a very different attitude and operation from punters and gamers ourselves. And that real distinction is them joining games outside of their local markets. So since COVID started, we've seen it push to digital more generally speaking. And we spoke about that in our last webinar, so feel free to go back and take a look at that one. But the gaming market has been particularly active, which I find quite interesting. So in the US alone, it's looking to grow a couple $1 billion all the way to 8 billion in the next few years. And that larger growth, that availability and the resulting in increased competition is driving domestic gamers and punters to look outside those home markets. So outside of the pandemic, another big shift to iGaming is also we've seen a rise in the use of cryptocurrencies, which we thought was a really interesting indicator within the gaming sector. Now, online casinos, alongside other more traditional methods, are accepting cryptocurrency as a payment. And so that will likely help continue to encourage that asset class as market dynamics and regulatory winds change to actually cover that asset and make it even more available in the gaming methodology and that shift to digital in this sector. So we saw several examples of this. There was the EU executive branch just recently introduced the regulation on markets and crypto assets, or the MiCA bill, last month. This would define what constitutes a crypto asset. It will stipulate that providers of crypto-based services must have a physical presence in the European Union. And also it says that if you get regulated and approved in one jurisdiction, you could actually provide that same service across the whole EU. So this framework, they're looking to put it in place in the next 3 or 4 years. So it does take some time, but it absolutely distinguishes and formalizes that asset class, which will continue to drive even more users and participation in gaming. Another interesting aspect around the global citizenry is that we're all part of it now. And that citizenry has really become social based. And when it's a social based environment, consumers are interacting and looking towards people from all around the world. An interesting statistic for everyone today: more than half of US consumers have opened an account hosted outside of their own country in the last 2 years. Over half. Now that's in relation to 30% only in the UK, but this is beginning to grow. And we're really seeing that drive and shift. Now, those interactions with international organizations really just pinpoints the global nature of your industry, and therefore the opportunities for operators to tailor their services and appeal to that international audience as it becomes social, as we interact with folks from all around the world. So those are some drivers that we're seeing that are increasing the borderless economy when it comes to gaming. And we just got back the results from our poll from just a few minutes ago. So almost half of the respondents today are still saying that the website, 47%, the website is the primary vehicle through which they are getting their applications. So quite comparative to other verticals that we see in our industry. And 13% said other, and 27% are through the mobile app. So continuing to grow. Interesting. Thanks everyone for answering. Now, why do we see this shift for consumers looking outside of their country of residence? Well, on top of what we just talked about, we're seeing 4 principal drivers. So as the barriers get broken down, consumers, their options increase dramatically. So the best experience, the most amazing customer journey, the great customer experience overall, that will have the larger chance of success. Now, there's always going to be local preferences. So what looks good in Hong Kong won't look good in the UK or the US necessarily. It will vary, but visuals aside, the onboarding process, it must be quick, easy, clean, and clear. And that is driving participants to experiment with providers outside their home market. We're also seeing financial benefits. There's bigger pools, these things change, they flow, they vary, different players, new competition, etc. We're also see more game options. So respondents have told us that, hey, there's different games, there's new opportunities in these international organizations, so I'm going to go try it. And absolutely, security is key. And this is how the service provider is protecting the user's personal information, how they're protecting their accounts. This is more overt. The signals and direction means the better result. So overall, why this is important to reference is that operators in the gaming industry need to put themselves in the shoes of their customers. You need to test the market outside to understand what's there, what the thought process is, what the competition is doing, and roll that into your renewed strategy, because it's no longer simply a local market that you're dealing with. So how do we look at this? What are some of the secrets and items to consider when we're talking about offering your services to a global consumer? And when we think about it, there's really that balance between providing first-class experience with safety. And there are many areas to consider when trying to find that perfect balance. Seamless onboarding, security, compliance, etc. If I had to sum it up for what we're seeing our customers and operators have the most success with, I would say it as shifting left. And shifting left is a security term, but I think of it around identity, compliance, and the rest. And what that means is you want to bring these questions to light. How can we best satisfy safety without sacrificing our customer experience? You want to bring those questions and have that strategic discussion earlier at the beginning of your software development lifecycle. You shift it left so that when you're ideating around how we get the best user experience, how we tackle these best consumers, compliance and security are discussed in that same breath, along with your UI and UX strategy. It's becoming much more common today, and that's where the success is happening, so that it's one coherent direction. The second piece that we see as a very important differentiator on how you can balance these two aspects is your risk-based approach, RBA, risk-based approach. And what this is building out the framework to take the appropriate action using the right technology at the right time and continuously improving thereafter. So as an experience, when you put yourself in the shoes of a consumer that's creating an account for the first time with a new gaming partner, how do we make sure that we handle the low risk cases and send them easy on their way? How do we put in place other event-based tracking so that we can improve our security where needed? And how do we make that seamless within the overall strategy? It's important to continue to dive in on this risk-based approach. And so that's what we're going to do next. All right, so when we talk about a risk-based approach, what does it mean? Because many of you would have heard it before, folks that are a little bit more experienced or are understanding how the compliance team gauges risk, but it's a business item as well. It's a strategic item. So it's really a mainstay in much of the regulatory world, but more important nonetheless is to contemplate its effectiveness today. So when we talk about RBA, it really bypasses the need to discover, understand, debate, implement specific measures across the board to combat every single threat you might have or every single risk that might be apparent within your user base. It more strives to provide a flexible policy, right, that is quicker to adapt, that provides a common sense philosophy to guide compliance and do the right thing. So we generalize and cohort our use case characteristics to determine what we need to put in place when. Now, systematically, a solid compliance program will always be characterized by actively trying to consider the possibilities and taking preventative actions. So we want you to think about that systematically across your customers, your partners, your regulators, security, risk, and everything, and create different scenarios so that it's preset and makes it smooth and easy to manage risk, but also create a very strong customer experience. And different factors that typically get considered in this risk-based approach is jurisdiction. Where are the users coming and logging in from? Where are they signing up? Products and services being offered or accessed. What kind of event are they wanting to take part in? Transaction values, are these small amounts, is it large withdrawals, et cetera, et cetera. And that will help you guide a risk-based approach to take an action. Another important concept that we hear about is perpetual KYC, or know your customer, perpetual know your customer. And that's really an event-based approach to security and fraud prevention. So it won't be a rigid workflow. But for example, if a user wants to take a large transaction or deposit or withdraw, maybe 60 days in the life cycle, that might trigger an additional layer of protection. So it's important to think about event-based and category-based risk approaches so that you don't have to run every single user through the exact same rigid process. You let them do that based on their activities and engines. So with that in mind, I'm going to throw out the second poll here. And that is, if a customer fails in the first attempt to get verified, so let's say someone's created an account and they fail for whatever reason, what information on Curious or documents do you request to further validate that individual's identity or action? Do we ask for a mobile phone number if you weren't before? Are folks asking for a government ID number, perhaps a document with a photo? Or is there something else that you do? Maybe put them into a different section of the site and they don't have access to all the games right away until they perhaps have a phone call or something along those lines. I'd love to hear your feedback in the second poll to see what everyone listening today is doing there. All right, so to summarize the areas that we just spoke about here and what we should be asking when we have our strategic discussions around user onboarding and strategy and success. How do we include security and compliance teams earlier in the process so that we can determine the appropriate measures and mitigate risk without sacrificing any customer experience methodology and success? And the second summary question we need to think about internally is how can we apply risk-based approaches while ensuring they satisfy the regulatory and fraud prevention challenges that we all face in this industry? Simply asking the questions, putting together a strategy will help make you all more successful in this international and highly competitive environment. Jumping in, you know, we wouldn't be talking about gaming if we didn't talk about the regulatory environment and how it's shifting. And I just find it so interesting and fascinating. There's been a lot of changes recently, especially in the UK and Europe, that need to be considered for folks that are operating in this world. And the regulatory environment is really akin to steering a large ship, frankly. It moves slowly, but they are typically big moves. And right now, the number of ships churning one after the other is increasing. So it does take time for any given change, but there have been so many that you really have to be agile in your ability to manage the impact of those changes. And some areas of note that we've seen our customers grapple with recently is, you know, GDPR has always been a big one. Now, it's been around for some time right now, and we do see fines and violations coming out. All organizations, of course, need to remain abreast about changes in GDPR and how it impacts your business when handling personal data in the gaming world. Recently, I think one of the interesting changes, especially in the context of an international user base, is how GDPR and the US-based Privacy Shield have been interacting, or not interacting in this case. And so there have been updates that have been required when you're dealing with different contractors, sub-processors, and customer data, how to manage European consumer information traveling in and out of the US. There's also a lot of talk right now about how GDPR aligns with Brexit. For now, there's been a transition period, and most of the rules are going to be put in place and continue, but there's going to be some changes there that everyone needs to be prepared for, as you have a lot of European and UK gamers and consumers and users that cross those borders. Big waves from a few months ago with the UK Gambling Commission, as they grapple with the increase in online gaming and how that's impacting players. So this will lead to additional measures that all of you are indeed aware of, and will likely need new technology and tools to monitor that activity and report on it. And in the US, so we see the US market continuing to grow. And this is, they're doubling in size in many different ways. So again, how do we manage and take advantage of the changing regulations that are going to open up even more gaming opportunities in that market? And how do we satisfy the international community of users to do so? I think on top of compliance regulations, the rise of fraud during COVID has been a major impact. Now, last webinar, again, we talked about COVID and its impacts on the digital commerce and digital activity, which has just been skyrocketing. But interestingly enough, with that increased volume has been the increase in fraud that's quickly followed it. And the top targets for online fraud just recently in Q2 2020 has been online gaming. It's a prime target. 65 attacks were reported every single second in this vertical. And the most attacked touch point was logins. It was a 22% uptick in the volume of attacks compared to the previous quarter. So that login phase, that account creation phase, is a huge target for fraud. And everyone on this webinar and everyone in the industry needs to be aware of how to protect themselves against that. Now, separately, a really interesting notice that I wasn't aware of is that in-game abuse has also increased tremendously. So there were 58 million in-game attacks. That's a 60% increase. So the fraud is apparent, it's there, and we need to make sure we understand how to protect ourselves in that environment. I just got back the second poll. So what do we do when we are failing in their first opportunity or effort to validate their identity? So more than half, 54% of those responding are asking for a document with a photo, with a selfie or video or something like that. So very interesting. That's what we see exactly across many of our customer verticals these days. So interesting to know. So we've talked about the changing environment. We've talked about the international gamer and how to take advantage of that, the increased competition that means. We've talked about fraud and the rise of that since the digital increases we've seen witnessed. And we've just talked about how you need to shift left and employ certain perpetual KYC measures to help not detract from your customer experience, but still make sure you can properly identify your users as well as protect against fraud while satisfying compliance. So where do we start? How do we answer all of that? It's a complex world. There are many variables. How do we fight back? So we've seen in our personal studies that we've done that online gamers, they cite security as the most important factor in any account creation process. And they do not believe that security is an excuse for slow or painstaking identity verification checks. They simply will not tolerate it, and you will lose those customers. They will go somewhere else. Furthermore, in those studies that we've done, we found that consumers look very favorably, in fact, around real-time identity verification. They perceive that as key to both delivering security and speed that they want when they open up an account. So implementing an effective technology solution that will help your business achieve this is critical to success, not only for today, but to future-proof your platforms for tomorrow and beyond. Here is another interesting statistic, right, that repeats a little bit of what we just covered, but it's from a slightly different angle that's important. So 77% of online gamers say that they're willing to share more personal data when they are using real-time identity verification. So not only do they feel more comfortable when you employ security measures that involve real-time identity verification, but they're more willing to share information and put that in. And what that means is if you're more willing to share, you're less likely to abandon. So they will not feel the process as friction. They will not feel the process as complex because they are meaningful sharing that information to improve their security as well as make sure that the customer interaction is smooth. If we talk about Trulioo and Global Gateway as our flagship product, this is how our solution approaches this challenge for our gaming customers. This is a very basic overview of our platform, but it's an important one to understand how the frictionless integration can be implemented into your user onboarding workflow very easily. So on the left-hand side, we see you're opening up a new account very similarly to through an iOS app or through a website like the majority of our participants today are doing. You can leverage any number of services that we offer very easily. It could be a personal information confirmation. It could be the ID document check, like we said was the follow-up in the last poll. You could even do legal entity checks in the same way. Through Trulioo's platform, we then connect you seamlessly and leverage over 400 trusted identity partners in 195 countries around the world, normalized into a single API or hosted low-code environment if that's your integration choice. And simply and easily, in sub 3 seconds, we will provide you with a response based on a simple rule that you produce for a yes or no response on that user's verification. And separately, we'll provide you the full payload of data response and flagging alerts within that call. So you can make it a very comprehensive review and also simplify the rule to get very quick and easy onboarding without interrupting that customer experience. And if we take a look back at what Trulioo has built, it's actually an entire network of networks. So Trulioo's platform connects you to a future-proof marketplace of identity services across the board. And we can select each and every one in a modular way, a la carte, depending on the customer's use case, depending on your need, and depending on where you want to implement that verification procedure or multiple procedures along the life cycle of the user. So a very simple age verification check up front, and then if they take a certain action or there's a certain event, you can add in an address, you can add in a document, you can add in whatever you like. And we cover biometrics, fraud, watch lists, risk intelligence layers, mobile carriers, business ID. So you have this entire standardized access pool that Trulioo delivers to you in a single service. A couple examples that I found were interesting from our customers. Last May, we saw a regulatory change for one of our gaming customers that had to implement full address verification very quickly. Before they weren't necessarily doing that. It was a simple configuration change that in the same day instantly provided them access to address attribute data sources in 20 different countries that they were live and operating in. We discussed perpetual KYC before, event-based. Again, let's assume maybe you do something very simple on the front end. If someone makes a large withdrawal request or a large deposit request, you can trigger seamlessly a document check just to confirm. All that's easily customizable and configurable on the platform. So this is how we look at the identity world, and we are happy to be the identity experts while you grow your gaming business. And with this normalized and modular network of networks, you don't have to be the experts. You can allow us to help and partner with you in that mission and that journey. So to summarize, and the takeaways that we had here today, really is to understand how international customers are, really looking at the world of gaming so that you can attract them with the right onboarding experience. It's really around the key considerations to think about when you want to have a world-class account opening experience, but definitely need to implement a risk-based approach to satisfy compliance needs, to satisfy fraud prevention needs, etc. We like to really think about how you can quickly assess your identity risk and auto-generate customized verification workflows to make an optimal experience. We have a variety of defaults. We have a variety of experts that can help you walk through that. But the greatest part is that you shouldn't change your user experience. We should just implement the right technology tools alongside it. And of course, at the end, we really think how real-time identity verification plays a crucial role in the gaming industry and along to satisfy all of these considerations. So I'd really like to thank everyone for joining us here today. There are a few links there directly to our site where you can download a lot of the stats in comprehensive format that I talked about today. We also have great blog posts and a lot of great information for folks that are looking to up their skill level and just learn and understand a little bit more about how this identity verification interacts with the compliance and gaming world. I'd encourage anyone to throw some Q&A into the chat window if you have any specific questions that I didn't speak to today or any follow-ups. And again, just thank you so much for joining us. We can always be reached at trulioo.com, and I'm available for any questions here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zach. It was a really comprehensive and insightful presentation, and good to see that interaction and engagement with the audience via the polls as well. As Zach said, we've now got some time to address some questions from the audience. To our listeners, obviously, please continue to send through any questions you may have, and we'll address as many as possible. I'm going to kick things off, actually. Just sort of the first question, Zach, is, so what would you say the key considerations that global gaming operators need to evaluate before choosing an ID verification provider? There's obviously a lot of competition out in that market today.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's difficult because there are so many different solutions and choices, and it definitely mirrors the uniqueness of every use case and the uniqueness of the service provision that you're providing. So listen, it's very easy to start making decisions around who you want to select as your technology partner for going global, and that's the first real question you have to ask. How many markets am I operating in? And what is the workflow that I want to achieve in those markets? So if you want a very simple registration, which most organizations do, let's just collect a name and an email or something simple, a phone number, so that we can verify an age or something along those lines. How can I do that, and who can provide that database and that access to identity services in all of the countries that I operate in? And then also, then you have to think about, well, if I have a risk-based approach and I want to collect a document afterwards, or I want to collect a phone number afterwards, or I want to collect an ID number afterwards, like a government ID number afterwards, again, can that same technology provider allow me to implement those same tools easily? Is there a simple workflow? Is there a simple API that I can attach? So that is the main point that you need to really think about and question is the coverage there for the services I want? Not to box me into a single point solution, because point solutions will not future-proof your business. We've seen too many times, even in the last 5 years, how often the identity workflow and process can change. So you need to really think about, is this partner providing a single solution that they believe can solve everything forever? Or are there layered approaches that I can add in as I need to and as the regulatory environment changes? And I think the second, I would recommend this for anyone choosing a technology service, is really make sure that they are a partner and not a service provider. And what I mean by that is there are service providers that provide, very good service, but they aren't there to help educate you, to help discuss this strategy with you. They aren't experts in the space, and it might be a very hands-off approach. When it comes to identity and compliance, you need a hands-off approach if you want it, but you absolutely need a partner that can provide that feedback, that intelligence, and that expertise for you when you need the help. And so I think that that's a very big thing, especially in our world around regulation change and identity as it changes so dramatically and quickly, that you have a partner as a technology vendor that can really discuss those with you and share strategies. And if something isn't available, they can make it happen.
Okay, thanks, Zach. You actually answered my second question I was going to ask about the global coverage aspect. My next question would be, do you have any tips or attributes to collect to help reduce fraud in each of these markets when you're sort of working internationally with this big coverage?
Yeah, so again, which data attributes to collect? So that is a very individualized question, right? Depending on the use case. So when you ask that question, what's important to consider is what is the demographic of my user base, right? If you're in the US and you're asking for, certain credit information, but there's a very young population that might not have the same credit history, you might be asking for the wrong information. So I think every demographic is a little different. But generally in the gaming world, what we see is an age verification step, quite obviously, right? And then we also are very seeing high upticks now in full address matching. So at a minimum, you want to collect your name, your address, and your date of birth. From there are a variety of tokens and pieces of information that you can collect that actually decrease your fraud and improve your verification status, like mobile carriers is a really strong one. And so there are a lot of fraud and risk signals built in to a mobile carrier and a phone number attribute that you can actually layer into the yes, no verification step as well. For example, if you have a user who submits a phone number, but that's actually registered as a payphone or a VoIP somewhere from a high risk area, you might question whether or not that's a legitimate phone number connected to that individual. Do you want to run an OTP, a one-time password, or something along that? Do you want to check if the SIM swap has occurred recently on that number? We have a variety of tools that we can implement actually for those attributes. So mobile phones are great. ID document numbers are great. The document itself is a little bit higher friction, but it can absolutely provide an extra fraud layer and verification step. So there are so many. That was just one small section of the options ahead of you, and so I would encourage every organization that has these questions to come ask us and talk to us. And we have an immense amount of experience, and we've run hundreds of millions of transactions across our platform. So not only can we let you know what attributes are available in those markets, but we can either even tell you what's happened with other verticals and other benchmarking in your own industry with those same attributes and what you can expect to see for success. So that's that intelligence layer, that's that experience that I talk about when we say partnerships are more important than service providers and vendors on their own. And so I think that's great conversations, a great question to have. It's the first one you should absolutely be asking. We welcome that conversation on a more granular basis for anyone that's interested in following up with that.
Thanks, Zach. Another question I have related to logins. Obviously, you said that that's the most kind of targeted stage of the process. I mean, how much of that is actually preventable through sort of proper password maintenance by players, and how much is that kind of section where it's actually is actually exposed to hackers? Do you know what I mean? How much is down to the expertise of hackers versus actually just players maintaining their password maintenance? And how do you as a company kind of get involved in that process to educate players better about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we talk about login, it can mean a few different things. So you can have actually a verification, which is typically in the login for the account creation process. What's that first time that I'm meeting this user? And what are the steps that I want to implement to have a high, high security, a high level of confidence that it is a real person that I want to do business with. Following up after that, when we have authentication, which is the ongoing logins of a user, and how do we create alerts around what activities they're doing. That's when I talk about perpetual KYC, and you really want to take a look at what kind of events and activities that user is doing to build protocols in place that might not, let's say, mimic what their typical characteristics or typical activities would be. There's a few different ways to do that. One of the ones that we're really interested in is we actually can layer in biometric information and categorization of activity based on that authentication login. And so there are certain methods that people employ every time they log in that you can actually track and store and compare against for the next time that user is. And that doesn't include any personal information at all. And so that's a really effective methodology. Other activities are more on the monitoring side and the accounts. And so before they can take a big action, before maybe they make a different decision within your network, within your game that they wouldn't have or haven't otherwise done before, those are all telltale signs that someone might have hijacked the account. So there are a variety of tools that you can leverage throughout the life cycle of the user, and that's how you have to think about it. Because you're right, people's passwords will get broken. They have gotten broken. It will happen again before. So we know that's a likelihood to happen, and that's the discussion of what you can do to put in place if and when it does. And so we really try and protect ourselves against large changes in attitude, but we can also put in place items on that actual authentication and verification layer to provide more confidence and higher confidence that this is the actual player that you are wanting to do business with. So, did they change their IP? Why are they logging in from, one country when they were in the other one before? Simple things that might just create flags and not necessarily stop the individual, but create flags for monitoring and alerting. And that's really the best way that we can go about handling these things so that you can take a subsequent action. Perhaps it gets escalated to a manual team. Perhaps there's AI. Perhaps there's machine learning over time. All these great tools and techniques that get built in. But you need a partner in that, and you need to really discuss what is typical for your environment, because at the end of the day, the gaming operator actually knows best from their experience. And what we're trying to do is leverage technology to help improve that, help scale that out, and help them put scarce resources, i.e. their people, to more high risk cases as opposed to spending time on the low risk operations.
Okay, thanks, Zach. That's great. Another one I've always touched on, you also talked about the rise of fraud during lockdown as well. And what are factors driving that? And also, is that as people have not so lockdown has kind of ended a lot of places, have you seen that lift, or is that residual level of fraud stayed in play?
And so that's just why are we seeing increase in fraud? Is that the general question?
Yeah, under lockdown, what was driving that? And have you seen that as, obviously that was with people being kind of, as you seen that lift lately as people's lives have turned to sort of more normal kind of working patterns rather than being at home? Or what's the how is the pandemic continuing to impact kind of fraud, I guess?
Yeah, so we've seen two really clear, consistent occurrences throughout all of our verticals that we deal with today. And we have about half a dozen primary verticals, everything from banking to gaming to payments, e-commerce, marketplaces, big tech. We deal with a lot of different verticals, and there's two driving components. The first is, yes, COVID has changed our world dramatically. What people used to be able to do in person, they are no longer able to, and that might have been fine for a week, a month, a couple months. But when we are in a position where it's looking like a year, we've already been in this for 6+ months, individuals are naturally going to try and, still enjoy their lives in a similar way, but digitally. And so we're not only seeing all these, brick and mortar organizations launching virtual digital experiences, but we're also seeing more people participate in the online economy simply because they cannot do what they were doing before. And that just increases sheer volume. Now, unfortunately, what that does create is also individuals who aren't necessarily as savvy or as familiar with the online environment as they are otherwise, both on the consumer side and the business side. So here, if you look at it from someone who is a professional fraudster, right? Someone who this is how they make their living, which, as unfortunate as it is, it's the reality. So when you see in that position a massive increase in volume, as well as a population, both consumers or businesses, that aren't as mature or familiar with how to protect themselves online, that is a massive opportunity. And so it is absolutely the fact that people cannot recreate this experience in person, and they are moving to a digital experience. I think that, frankly, we've been driving towards more online activity for many years now. and just the penetration of mobile phones and how amazing the applications are now and the user experiences are so strong, it naturally attracts more and more participants to it. And COVID was an accelerator and a catalyst on that. And so we've seen, a lot of people are saying, we saw 3 years of digital transformation in about 3 months' time. And so fraud is naturally going to attack that increased volume, as well as the lack of maturity in a lot of those organizations. And so we are seeing increases for that reason. And I think now, where we are now, you're right in the sense that maybe someone who maybe wouldn't participate in the gaming world before, our options for entertainment and for fun are limited. And when sports came back, and as games become more prolific and prominent, you're going to have new users, absolutely. And that's a great opportunity as we see the regs change, and now there's more of an international opportunity. All these different factors are driving together to create a very large growth. So this is all good stuff. But what operators need to do, and what we love to help our customers and partners with, is how do we take best advantage of that while protecting the consumer? Because at the end of the day, if you're a gaming operator and you're not protecting the consumer, you're going to have challenges in terms of growing your presence and growing that experience. And so there are a lot of ways we can protect the consumer. One of the big ones is making sure that you are preventing fraud from entering your ecosystem. And that's where we help. And the other one as an operator is simply, satisfying the compliance obligations that you have, and you can't operate without that. So, that's where we're seeing a lot of the growth from. And that's where we're seeing the increased activity from people that want to detract from that in the name of fraud.
Okay, thanks, Zach. It was great. Rodolfo came in and he said, "Thank you very much for providing into the report. This is nice." Okay, can we coming to the end of my questions now? This is the audience's opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. You touched on compliance, Zach. So my last question. I mean, see, this is becoming a big issue across many markets now. As you said, you likened it to a large ship with a big turning circle and suddenly moving very slowly and suddenly big moves. And how does this process work? I mean, the operators and stuff you work with completely reliant on you just to be ahead of the curve here, and then just come to them with the solution already implemented, or how does this work? Or does it come to you and with their kind of concerns about these, and you have to provide tailored solutions? How does it actually work dealing with all this compliance, and how are you set up for that?
It's so interesting. It's everything in between. We work with businesses that have been around for 100 years, that are looking to scale up or improve the current situation they have with compliance, and how can we satisfy our compliance goals and requirements without interrupting that user experience. Trulioo was always an international. We always started internationally. We've always been in the hard to reach markets. We've always converged with a global customer. And so it's really complex. If you put yourself in the shoes of a risk or compliance officer, if I'm responsible for my business's adherence in 20 different countries, that can be really challenging to standardize my platform, to standardize my user experience in light of all of those variances. And I mean, we've seen more change in regulatory legislation than ever before in the last 5 years, than ever before. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of changes. And not only in the compliance side, in terms of what do I have to satisfy for my KYC or AML, but also just some privacy legislation. So what do I do with my data, and what must I do, and what kind of process do I have to ensure downstream with all of my sub-processors and contractors and service providers, et cetera? It's not easy. So there are absolutely times when a new customer comes in and they have a very clear need. And so we have a variety of default configurations that can get launched on the same day, with a variety of attributes and sources and services that you can set up very quickly. that operate in all of the principal markets and even the developing economies. Then you also have organizations that have very complex, mature workflows and processes that they don't want to rebuild. Like they're not, you know, burning down the whole building and rebuilding it up. They want to take advantage of technology that they can plug and play where they need it. And that's how we build our products. So flexibility is key. And so we have customers with very specific requests that they can easily take advantage of. And then we also have customers who say, I'm not sure where to get started. And in those cases, we absolutely offer our intelligence and our experience with similar organizations in the space so that they can take advantage of that as they familiarize themselves with all of their places. Now, we don't replace a compliance or risk team. We're on the team. And so, you know, you do absolutely, as a gaming operator, need to make sure that you have professionals who are experts in this space and who are dedicating their full-time attention to it. But you want to make sure that we include them in the strategic conversations, and it's not after the fact. That's where we see most organizations get in trouble, and that's why I talk about shift left. Is if you're coming to the table with questions to say, hey, this is what we want to build, this is what we want to achieve, that's a great conversation to have, and we help customers with that every single day. It's when you're struggling, if you put everything in place and you have a very specific finite, you know, confine, and then you're just trying to throw security and compliance in after the fact, is when you have less success. Now, it is possible, but you'll have less success in that format. So we love to have those conversations earlier on.
Okay, thank you, Zach. We're coming to the end of our time today. I think so. I'd just like to say thank you very much again to Zach for joining us and sharing his insight. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available to listen to on demand shortly on igamingbusiness.com for you all to rewatch and share with your colleagues. Otherwise, I'd like to say thank you to Zach, and we'll see you all very soon. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.